Hello.
Meg, thanks for joining the Biking for Babies Speech Guide crossover podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
This is your third year doing Biking for Babies, is that right?
Correct. Correct. Yes.
Okay. Tell us you have the interesting backstory, which maybe we touched on last episode, because in a sense you go way back to the beginning too,
Mhm.
of when Jimmy and I bicycled through DeKalb, Illinois. You were there, but like how were you there? Because you look so young.
Well, my mom heard that you guys were going through and she was like, "Okay, like I have to support my second cousin." So she brought all of her kids and honestly, I don't remember that first ride. Um, so I can't tell you if some of my
What?
aunts showed up. I'm sorry. I was only 9. But I remember like
That's
you
well
guys.
beyond the age of reason. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What was
Oh,
that?
just wanted to be disturbing.
Okay, you turn 9 and then you remember it after that.
Well, I remember it, like, when I was,
Yes.
like, 12, but yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you have a few.
I remember later rides,
that,
not the first one.
okay, but help me along here. So you apparently saw those rides and started remembering them when you were 12, and you apparently supposedly wanted to do biking for babies later on in life, right?
Well, one of the missionaries, when they were at my aunt's house, they looked me dead in the eye and was like, "You could be the next Biking for Babies missionary." And I was like, "Oh, shoot." Like, you said it, now I have to do it.
Wait,
Um,
was this when you were 12 or 20?
no, I was 16, and so it was a very, like.
Oh, okay, okay. The middle years. The middle years.
Yeah. And it kinda scared me because I was like, "Okay, like, in 2 years," like, I'm a very, like, competitive person, so I kinda looked at that invitation as a challenge, and so that's why I did it when I turned 18. Well, part of
Okay.
why I
And so
did
what
it.
was the first ride that you did? And what was that like? Where was that?
The first ride I did was down my street, because I went out and, like a new rider, I went to a bike shop and I was like, "Hey, help me out here." And they were like, "Oh, you should buy this bike." So I went and bought a brand new bike and I was just getting used to like riding and shifting gears and whatnot. So I didn't really go out on any like really long rides on my bike until like end of May. Which was kinda really bad as, like, a first year, but,
A little late,
I
Meg.
did. Yeah, I know, but I did a lot on, like, the stationary bike at the YMCA, and it was actually kind of funny because when I hit 20 miles, the bike would shut off on me because my heart rate was too high,
What?
and so
Ah,
so I would jump on
you
a
remember what your heart rate was?
I do not, but I would jump on a different bike and start pedaling until I hit 20, and then I would just swap bikes in the gym because they kept shutting off on me until I, like,
Wow. That's a
milestone.
fun little story.
Yeah, it was. It scared my mom when I went
Okay, and then you
there.
okay, so you did the national ride that year. What was that like?
That was crazy. I was not expecting cycling to be as fun as it was. Um, it was really hard, especially at the beginning because the Wisconsin route starts with 120 miles, and depending on if you take a wrong turn, that can add up to 130. Or if the route gets changed, I know last year it was like 145 miles, and I was like, "What the heck are we doing?" But it was really great though. Like I really got to experience what it was like to like come together with strangers, but then grow together as family and just like any concerns you had, they weren't important anymore because what you were focusing on was like getting to St. Louis and staying together as a team and biking for these moms and these babies, and that was the only thing that was important, not that you were living with 12 other strangers for the first time in your life. Yeah.
And what's the preparation looking like now? How's the team looking? What route are you doing? How's
Yeah.
fundraising going?
Um, I'm on the Nebraska route. So we're going from Lincoln to St. Louis, which I am really thrilled about. Kind of nervous because it's a new route. All I know is that is the Wisconsin route. Um, but I am really excited to like be with my team. Um, we've got a really solid team, very filled with the Holy Spirit. Actually, all of the guys on my team are either priests or seminarians, and there's 5 guys. So that was pretty crazy learning that. And then just I'm really excited for support crew, especially. Like, I've seen it in the one-on-one calls, how loving they are and caring, and I think that it's just they're gonna be great moms for the riders. Uh, but my training personally, I've been struggling with a lot of injuries. I have had knee issues since last October, and I walked the Camino in May and got Achilles tendonitis, which is still healing.
Ugh.
And so, yeah. So that is I'm trying to, like, get on the bike as much as possible, but then not overdo it. But this past week, actually yesterday, I did 20 miles without any pain in my knees or my Achilles, so really hyped about that, and I have my 100 planned for Saturday. So, if all goes well and I complete that
Nice.
100 pain-free, then I'll be set for the national ride. Yeah.
Great. Love the attitude.
Meg, you know who to call if you're having issues.
I know, it's just, like, a matter of, like, being humble enough and, like, telling myself that I actually need help because I'm very, like okay, I'm very prideful, and it's just I'm I'm just gonna push through it, you know? If I get injured, I get injured. It doesn't matter. It's for the moms and babies, right?
But
Yep.
if you're injured and you can't ride for your team, that's a different story.
That's right. That's right.
Well, sounds like training's going pretty darn well. You're just a few days away from that classic 100-mile ride. Always feels good crossing the 100-mile mark. Doesn't matter if you still have another 100 or 200 miles more to go.
So you're
That's a lot.
introducing it, Meg. Just give it your best shot.
You can make
Give it your
notes. You
best
can
shot.
make
Can I
notes
write
too.
wait, can I write this down real fast?
Yeah, you can write this down.
It's the 3rd
Mike will
Okay.
episode.
help you.
1993, 3rd episode.
Okay.
Um,
Of the Speech Guys podcast.
1993 World Youth Day speech. Well, you and makes me. I'm sure she'll fill in the blanks here. Hopefully, 1993 World Youth Day speech by John Paul II in Denver.
You're adding things to this.
No, no. And who's on the call tonight? You know our names. And just like you said, put some icing on it. Cue the music, something like that. Make it dance. It's just like your first bike ride. We gotta let go of you, let you spread your wings, and introduce. People are gonna be at the National Ride Celebration Live. Be like, Meg, you were on the Speech Guys. You introduced the episode. And be like,
I have
yeah,
to
I did.
I have to say the speech guys too, and
Ready.
you can edit this,
You're gonna do
right?
great,
You got
Meg. Don't worry.
And okay, Meg, I'm handing it over to you.
Wait,
Introduce the podcast, the episode, and who we got on. Yeah, you're going. You're going. And a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3. How about let's help you start.
Mike, this is its own podcast, how to teach someone
Okay.
to do an introduction. That's what we're
How
doing.
about I'll do this. Introducing Meg Sardegna, who is introducing the podcast. Meg, take it away.
After all that, I'm afraid we lost Meg's audio for that introduction. With that being said, the speech today is John Paul II's 1993 World Youth Day address, in which he invokes the words of St. Paul. Woe to you if you do not succeed in defending life. So, hope you enjoy the show.
When you see the road from every direction, it will give you eyes, give you hope, it'll give you perspective. I've been back and forth, and yeah, I had my crashes. Now I've seen the road, it goes every direction. Oh, there are stories to tell, the times we grew and the times we fell. Oh, I've been afraid some days, but the road will lead us to a better place. Road will lead us to a better place.
Okay, folks, we're back. The final Biking for Babies special series episode. As Meg said, she was right. She nailed it. Jimmy, Kevin, Nikki, me, we're all on. Nikki's the newcomer to it. Not a newcomer to Biking for Babies. Sorry, we're gonna have to be brief because Meg had a lot of airtime there. What's your story with Biking for Babies? We heard a little bit about it last episode, but what you do now, how you got into it, everything in between. Well, some of it.
So Kevin did start with how I got him signed up. So he told that piece of it. Back it up just a little bit to mention that I converted to Catholicism as a senior in high school. Part of that process was started by meeting Kevin, who I'm married to now. But I will never forget the first mass that I ever went to. As someone who did not come from a faith background, truly, I was absolutely terrified. And it was a whole choreographed song and dance, as I describe it. That's why I was terrified as a 16-year-old girl walking in the room where everybody knows what they're doing and saying. And it's a lot of stand, up, down, kneel, up, down, kneel. And I'm just looking around trying to keep up. So setting the stage there a little bit, that it was all very new to me. In the homily, Father Marty Fox, quoting Mark 9:23, everything is possible for he who has faith. So became Catholic a couple years later as a high school senior, and I went to UW-Madison. That's where I met Jimmy. As Kevin told the story, is very, charismatic and strong in his beliefs, and as I would describe, relentless, and convinced Kevin to go with him after I offered it as a suggestion. And I didn't even go on Biking for Babies that first year. It was, I had something going on that summer, probably an internship or something, and in God's plan, I went 2 years later and got to just experience the beauty of the ride as a support crew missionary and encounter pregnancy resource centers, which I, as a Catholic convert, thought I would have experienced more in the pro-life arena at that point, a few years into my Catholic faith, but I truly hadn't. So Biking for Babies really, for me, solidified what it means to be pro-life and to live the gospel, as we'll talk a little bit more about today. I was a volunteer with B4B for a number of years, joined the leadership team to help our previously named route leaders, and we got to our 10th year as an organization, all volunteer-led still. We were saturated, just felt like, so a lot of conversation around what is God calling this mission to. By this point, I had graduated college. Kevin and I were married, and I was in the corporate retail world. And we were having conversations in this mission about, is God calling us to, the same results every year, 20 to 30 missionaries, couple rides, raising, $70,000 to $80,000, which is nothing to balk at all. It was incredible what God was doing in this mission. We felt called to more. And at the same time, Kevin and I had just had our third baby, Thomas, and I was going back from my maternity leave to Target, going back to, 80-hour work weeks outside of the home. I was a breadwinner for our family. Kevin was in school getting his PhD. And I felt this for the first time, a longing on my heart to not be gone from my family for that long. And I felt like I was missing things. So God was putting that on my heart at the same time that he was putting on Sarah Weiss, who was our volunteer president at that time for Biking for Babies, putting on her heart that she wasn't called to be the first ever full-time staff for this mission. And Kevin and I are just sitting in our kitchen. Sorry, trying to tell this as brief as I can, but our kitchen and having conversations about what life is going to look like with me going back to work. And he, out of the blue, very Holy Spirit said, "Why don't you just be the executive director of Biking for Babies?" And I was like, what? That's ridiculous because A, it's Sarah's job, and B, I could not ever be the executive director of a pro-life nonprofit. I don't know the first thing about that, but I would love it and it would be amazing. Few tears shed of excitement. I was very afraid to tell anybody, but one day I called Sarah, got enough courage and called her to say, "I'm not trying to steal your job, but I feel very strongly that this is something we need to consider." And she said, "What a burden lifted. I've been waiting for someone else to step up." I'm willing to bet those are almost the exact words she said because I about fell on the floor. Like, holy moly, God is doing something here. And we have not looked back. So I'm going into my 7th year as the executive director here. And it's been absolutely a blessing for our family, has totally transformed our faith lives. This is our mission. And, a couple $1 million donated to pregnancy centers later. Over 200 missionaries experience this program and evangelizing and sharing the gospel. And I'm excited to be here.
Great summary of that. Kevin, will you take over the rest of the hosting responsibilities here? I trust you. You nailed it.
All right.
That's it.
Okay. Well, I'll try to go for 2 for 2 then, I guess. So tonight, as Meg introduced, we are going over the 1993 address from St. John Paul II at World Youth Day. This is in Denver, Colorado. So on American soil, just to give some context, it's a relatively lengthy speech. We will not read the entire thing. Definitely encourage you to go read it, though, because there's some great lines in here. It is packed full with just amazing content. We're gonna read kind of the latter half of the quote or of the speech because this holds the quote that motivated Mike and Jimmy to start Biking for Babies. Nikki, if you don't mind, with you being kind of the newcomer, as Mike said, would you mind reading the part of the speech that we're going to go over today?
Okay, awesome. Young pilgrims, Christ needs you to enlighten the world and to show it the path of life, the path to life. The challenge is to make the church's yes to life concrete and effective. The struggle will be long, and it needs each one of you. Place your intelligence, your talents, your enthusiasm, your compassion, and your fortitude at the service of life. Have no fear. The outcome of the battle for life is already decided, even though the struggle goes on against great odds and with much suffering. This certainty is what the second reading declares. Christ is now raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. So in Christ, all will come to life again. The paradox of the Christian message is this: Christ, the head, has already conquered sin and death. Christ in his body, the pilgrim people of God, continually suffers the onslaught of the evil one and all the evil which sinful humanity is capable of. At this stage of history, the liberating message of the gospel of life has been put into your hands, and the mission of proclaiming it to the ends of the earth is now passing to your generation. Like the great apostle Paul, you too must feel the urgency of the task. Woe to me if I do not evangelize. Woe to you if you do not succeed in defending life. The church needs your energies, your enthusiasm, your youthful ideals in order to make the gospel of life penetrate the fabric of society, transforming people's hearts and the structures of society in order to create a civilization of true justice and love. Now more than ever, in a world that is often without light and without the courage of noble ideals, people need the fresh, vital spirituality of the gospel.
Awesome. Thank you, Nikki. Just to set a touch more context to this, so the first part of the speech talks about the Assumption of Mary, because that's the feast day that this mass is being taken place on, and then that is kind of the end of the excerpt. So, just with that, gentlemen, what are some first thoughts that you have?
Gentlemen and Nikki.
And Nikki, I was sorry, I actually said gentlemen specifically for you or Mike to start talking to give Nikki
What kind
some
of
time.
household is this, Kevin? It's like, what, is she speaking only when spoken to?
All right, Nikki, if you would even like to lead off, I guess we're open to that. So everybody, what's your first take?
The first thing that comes to mind for me, because I don't know how much of you guys want to go into the context of the time, but as I was kind of looking into um, what was happening in 1993, specifically in Denver, was a lot of civil unrest and a lot of crime, and people in the city were afraid, is how it was described. And they truly thought that like 20,000 people were going to come to this World Youth Day thing, like it was no big deal, the only time that World Youth Day has ever come to the United States. And what, like 750,000 people showed up, and crime in the city stopped, like overnight, practically, is how it was described. I don't have any stats or anything, but it was like, I had no idea the context behind that. And peaceful pilgrims, that many people came. And as we'll talk about, like a ton of young people flocked to see the Pope and hear the Holy Spirit's words.
Jimmy, maybe you can sort of, I know we've talked about this before, but sort of rehash this, obviously, because you had read this, right, shortly before I had mentioned to you about the 100-mile bike ride that inspired my half, Biking for Babies, but you had read this as well. What was the context for reading this around that time again?
Can't hear you.
Man.
Try to hit settings and see what mic you can pick.
I hate delete too.
Blessed Carlo Acutis. Help us out, man. Good thing you can cut all this out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, maybe just. Oh, I saw blue.
I saw it too. Oh, that's him moving, unless someone's tapping their keyboard.
Mm.
No, I mean that wouldn't. Noise is noise. Just leave and come back.
Yeah, I can hear him knocking. That's so weird.
Well, I mean, I'm knocking.
Oh, it's Mike.
Oh, you
I
are.
thought it was.
I'm sorry.
I thought it was Jimmy too.
I just saw blue right when he was about to. So
That's funny. Oh, that is Mike. I was like watching Jimmy's screen so intently. I was
like, how come it's picking up his touches on the computer? Well,
very
persevere.
good. Very good. Very expensive.
Aubrey said she had a lot of technical difficulties too. This is.
Yeah.
It's okay. We're gonna make it.
No.
Fudge.
Did you change the settings to different audio microphones? No.
Yeah, that's weird that it dropped mid-call because he was talking just fine.
Yeah. We can just all leave and come back and see what that does. Okay.
Will you have to re-record or no?
No. It can just be spliced together.
Okay, perfect.
Maybe before I get to answer your question, Mike, I wanted to pull out a 2-sentence statement and then I'll kind of circle back to the question. But what stood out most specifically with what Nikki read there was these 2 sentences back to back. The challenge is to make the church's yes to life concrete and effective. The struggle will be long and it needs each one of you. And then the encouragement follows in the next sentence. Place your intelligence, your talents, your enthusiasm, your compassion, and your fortitude at the service of life. So that's something I want to dedicate a little bit of time to tonight to unpack. We'll get there in due time. But there are also three phrases that were included within that short little excerpt as well that I think are really important as they apply to us as an organization and really to all Christians. And the first one at the very beginning of what he says, "Young pilgrims, Christ needs you." So more, less words, Christ needs you. Number two, in the second paragraph, have no fear. And the third statement is towards the end of what Nikki read, transforming people's hearts. So Christ needs you, have no fear, transforming people's hearts. Woe to you if you do not succeed in defending life. As we had shared in the initial episode, back in 2008, Mike and I were on break, and I was reading a book. It was a book about it wasn't just explicitly about this homily, but it included this homily within the book. And I think it was called like A Man on a Mission, and it was reflecting on John Paul II. And as I got to the chapter that kind of broke down some of the statements from this homily, it hit me like a ton of bricks reading that simple statement. And it was a call to action, like an immediate call to action. And it was more than anything, it was a recognition and an acknowledgement of my, I'll call it, sin of omission, not just in what I was doing, but more so what I was failing to do, in that I was not responding. And so it wasn't done in any sort of not constructive way. It was actually very encouraging. It left me motivated to want to do something. And so that's kind of what started then, sharing that with you, Mike, and then from there getting John Paul Denons involved and a lot of others from the get, and just asking God and asking others, like, what can we do? And I think as it pointed out, it's using your intelligence, your talents, your enthusiasm, your compassion, and your fortitude. And the result of that discernment is biking for babies, or was biking for babies.
Nice. Mike, what about you? Because obviously you and Jimmy talked about this. So when you first heard this speech, what were kind of your thoughts from this?
I don't know. Come back to me. Kevin, what's your first reaction?
So my first thought when I read this actually has to do, it is around the same spot that Jimmy's talking about, but it has to do with that in the mission of proclaiming it to the ends of the earth is now passing to your generation. I think that's a really interesting call, and I'm a big J.R.R. Tolkien fan, so I heard that and immediately thought about a particular quote from Tolkien. This is in the Lord of the Rings, the books, not the movie, but in the book, The Return of the King. They're kind of talking about like having defeated Sauron. And so Gandalf has this quote, I'll kind of read it. He says, "It's not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the secure of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule." And I just think, so I bring that up. I have this quote actually hanging in my office at work because it's kind of a reminder to me that the day that I have today is the day that I have to make a change or to do something. It's kind of an urgency, right? It's kind of a reminder of what my time right now it's for. It's for God's mission. And so I find it very striking that he uses this and then goes in to say the phrase that ultimately would motivate Jimmy and you, Mike, which is "woe to you if you do not succeed in defending life," connecting that to 1 Corinthians 9:16, when Paul says, "Woe to me if I do not evangelize." And so there's just this sense of urgency. And I think, but urgency, I don't know how to explain this super concretely. It's urgency with a lot of joy. So, and that's why I kind of thought about this quote from J.R.R. Tolkien, because Gandalf is he's happy that they've won, but he's also aware of the next generation needing to put in the work to uproot their own evil in their time. And so it felt like when John Paul is saying this, he's recognized that he's done a lot of work for the church and for this mission of respecting life. But he also knows that it needs to be carried on. And so as Mike, Jimmy, and I and Nikki honestly sit here as kind of the first generation of biking for babies, just makes me think that that's in some ways we have to pass this on. And it's really cool that we had Meg on today as someone who watched you guys when she was 9 years old. So there's that next generation that is being passed on to. And so that's, I think, just shows how Baking for Babies has really followed kind of in the path of this speech.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of, again, yeah, urgency of the task. And I'm thinking of how that has sort of infused, the certain ethos of biking for babies. I mean, there's the funny way, but it's also true at the same time. There was the 1 year, what was that? I guess it was 2013 when urgency was the motto of the day of getting from my mom and dad's in Freeburg, which is southeast of St. Louis, up to Champaign, which is 180 miles. And of course, we had to get there, by a little bit before 5 for 5 o'clock mass that Saturday night. And we had. Memphis, of course, we got in that night like 9 p.m. or 8:30, and we were only going 150 miles that day. We had to go another 30 and finish 4.5 hours earlier. And yeah, I mean, urgency, we were obviously funny about it, but serious at the same time, because I mean, I think it was a sort of natural spiritual logic to biking for babies that, well, yeah, we could just, bike 150 and call it a day and just come up with these logistics to, make sure that we shuttle people in the van a couple of times to make that last 30 miles. But that's not, that wasn't the moral relationship that we had formed between biking for babies and how we did things, and how Jimmy and I had been sort of shaped by the pro-life ethos. You don't compromise or take shortcuts or say, that's good enough, right? You say, this is what we set out to do, so we're gonna make sure we make this happen. And I think it's that. So that manifests in a certain obvious way in that story. But I think that the sort of more quiet notes were sort of, developing, whether it was in that 2008 summer phone call or just the years leading up to that.
Well, Mike, I think that's a really good segue into one of the questions that we have posed, which is on this idea of a moment of urgency. I think it's very specific at this point where the tone changes. It's very urgent about young people. We need you to do this. The question kind of is posed: how does this shift of tone and speech? How does it energize? Does it put pressure? Does it even alienate some listeners? And I want to actually, if you don't mind, I want to tie this into Biking for Babies a little bit, because we have been asked throughout the years, well, why don't you just do 20 miles? Why don't you do 50 and get more and more missionaries? And in some ways, that seems like John Paul II, he's not beating around the bush. He's like, this has to happen now. And I think people could have said the same thing. Well, what if we wait a few years, or what if we wait till another generation, or things like that? So I guess maybe we can play off of that idea of kind of this urgency, and does it attract people, or does it disengage them?
Mm. Is that for me or for everyone?
Those for everybody. Yeah. So the heart of the question is: does this sense of urgency attract or detract like younger generations?
I mean, for us, I think I'm speaking for all of us here. It was very attractive. We knew. There's a book by Simon Sinek, Know Your Why, or something like that. And so I think in knowing the why, it was very easy kind of, yeah. It was a very attractive to want to jump in and saddle up when we knew what we were doing, why we were doing it, and ultimately who we were doing it for. And I think that, yeah, we went in the first year not really knowing what to expect. I don't think we had those answers to those questions really fully defined. I think that came over time. But one thing we did know is that we were, with God's help, going from point A to point B, with the starting down in Southern Illinois and finishing in Chicago. And we knew that we were limited on a specific time frame. So, yeah, I mean, I think that in life, it's appreciating, in the same way like God invites us to take up our cross and to follow Him. And you can ask that same question, Kevin. Like, is that attractive, or does that detract people away from the faith? And I mean, I think the sense of urgency and the invitation from Christ to take up our cross and follow Him, it is attractive. Doesn't make it easy. I mean, even going back to what I shared earlier, like John Paul made it very clear, the struggle will be long, and it needs each one of you. And so it's awesome when you feel part of a team and you recognize you're doing something for somebody beside yourself. And I think that it's helpful when you have some kind of clear objective, if you will. And I try and think of how that then relates to a mother who finds out that she's pregnant and doesn't know what to do. At the same time, too, like the call to action for her is to respond to love with love and to make the most of the situation. But she's not intended to be on an island or by herself. And so what's both attractive for her and for her community of people, us included, is that that's our call to action to respond. And the question then becomes like, how are you going to respond? And putting more words to that from this talk, how are you going to respond concretely, and how are you going to respond effectively?
What's coming to mind for me doesn't exactly relate to what Jimmy was just saying, but is it attractive or does it detract for these young people? I think we all know that St. John Paul II was very compelling every time he spoke, and particularly just the number of apostolates that came after his address here. I know that focus, which was how you and Mike met, or you and Jimmy met, Mike, or just how you guys deepened your faith and your relationship together, and started that early foundation of our mission here. But yeah, focus was inspired by this address in particular. I believe the Augustine Institute was as well, and just different ministries that came out of it. So I guess the very simple answer in my mind is that it was really attractive for people who were there that day, like the number of vocations that came out of it, in addition to the apostolates. It was, as Jimmy has said, it was just like it was a roadmap, starting earlier in the speech, just with Mary and her example and her yes, and then really looking at these young people. It was incredible that St. John Paul II just straight up addressed young people like this is your responsibility, because a lot of what the culture of death is offering and we've found wanting is it's young people that are very much in the throes of that and can be the change makers. And that's where our mission comes in, directly trying to attract these young people, give their yes to being very visible public witnesses to the gospel, to, as Jimmy said, responding to the opportunity to love with love, responding to a crisis, right? Whether it's a woman in unplanned pregnancy, or name another crisis, but respond to that crisis with what can I do? How can I be a part of this with you? Because God made us to He made us for each other, and to respond to that that opportunity to love with uh, my own individual yes.
It's hard to draw a line around like the question of how hard should something be. I mean, I think it sort of just varies upon circumstance to circumstance to some degree, but there certainly is, I think, maybe a good way to characterize it, in the same way that Christ's life was dramatically, hard and raw and self-sacrificing. It was also deeply, gentle and empathetic too, right? It managed to be both of those things. And I think with that's I think sort of just having that attitude in mind, and allow it to be sort of shaped by prayer and discernment throughout life, um, can sort of help be that lens to discern, when the 1,000 mile or 600 mile bike ride is the right call, or a 5K with grandma, for a cause or something. Because each has their place, I think. But I think maybe the one other thing I will note is, I don't know if this makes sense, but I'll say it and maybe it will make sense. But hard things, I think, can almost be harder to quit, and easy things can be easier to quit. Right. I mean, if you make a certain commitment to do biking for babies, it's like, man, like you gotta measure up to that. But if you sign up to do a 5K, right, it almost seems like people care less of whether or not you go through with it or not. And it's still a great thing to do. I hope you're successful out there if you're out there wondering if you should do a 5K. But yeah, so something keep in mind. And everyone has or should have like some biking for babies in their life. Maybe it's not biking 600 miles, but of course, as we say, ad nauseum is not the right word for it, because there's nothing to be nauseous about. But to that effect of, right, parenthood, right, is the everyman's biking for babies. Right, just
Not
this
for the
thing
faint
that's
of heart.
dramatically difficult and uncompromising is the more effective word there. So
I like that. So I don't know where in the Biking for Babies archive, but I did address this question, the specific question of like, why don't we just do like a little 5 mile ride? And to be fair, we do local rides. So that is a part of our mission, but the larger one, Mike, I like what you said about you just can't quit something hard. I even think, we talked last time about my first year and you and Jimmy witnessed it. I do think there was part of it of just I'm there. Like, what else are you gonna do on a 5K? I could just like walk down the
mm,
street and go home. We're in dead middle of Mississippi. Like, there's no home. It's just you got to get there somehow, right? So,
there
um,
is no home, Kevin. There is no home. That's what I kept telling them the whole way. You have no home. I am your home.
I feel like in some ways it's hilariously true. I reflect back talking to my parents, like we cell phones were a thing, but man, cell reception was not great, definitely not where we were. Like there's no really escape to it. And not in a bad way. I think it's similar to the cross. Like you mentioned Christ's life. He knew his mission. He knew he was not going to leave the mission. And in that way, I think obviously he's God, but trying to speak to the humanity side of it, he every part of his life was in it. And that's kind of what I argue with keeping the rides as long as they are in the blog that I wrote, which is for me, being not a biker, I had to think about biking for babies 365 days out of the year because I was not a runner. I was not doing this normally. So I had to consciously make efforts to keep my body in shape to do this thing. And so it ended up being a lifestyle, which was crazy to even think about because that was not the intent when I first started and even the second year. But it's just kind of, how it morphed into. And then it became a culture, which Mike, I know you talked a lot about in the first podcast, just this culture of people around me who were supporting it. And I think that's what hard things do. So, Mike, I think you're totally on point there. If people don't mind, I want to move on to another question because I think it's a good segue to this question, which is John Paul II. He speaks directly to the youth as if they're the front lines of the church mission. And how effective do we think that directness is? Because he is very forward that they are the next generation. As I mentioned, this is the generation it's passing on to. How do you think people took it in '93? I was a year old, so I don't remember it. How do you think people back then took it, given kind of the time, and then how do we embody that today?
When's your birthday, Kevin?
'92, April 30th, '92.
What year did you graduate high school?
High school, 2010.
Okay, so you were a freshman when I was a senior. Got it.
Yep.
It's not that different. Were you thinking it was more or less, Mike?
Well, I've thought of us as basically being the same age, so I was just thinking of some of it. Yeah,
I think Biking for Babies does that. You're like, we're all just the same.
yeah. be hanging out with 18-year-olds in 20 years. Like, sup, guys? Like, hey, I'm one of you. I'm one of
Kevin
you.
works with college students, so he knows all the cool phrases.
I purposely use millennial slang just to watch their eyebrows do one of these. It's fantastic.
We don't have slang. We just talk right.
Kevin, do you mind just re-asking or putting it more succinctly as a question?
Yeah.
Right.
So the question is, John Paul II, he speaks directly to the youth as if they're the front lines of the church. How effective do you think that was, and how did people respond in '93? And how effective is that today to say the youth of today are the front lines of the church?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question because I think this kind of goes back to what we talked about last time, just in recognizing how prophetic John Paul was in he's kind of seeing ahead of the times, so to speak, or having some foresight to what was coming. And I think in that regard, it wasn't necessarily that he was throwing everybody in his generation or older in the bus or under the bus, but rather he saw something in the youth that and I think both him and then Pope John Paul or Pope Benedict XVI after him kind of saw the new springtime, so to speak. They saw something that was within the generation that was addressed there in 1993 and the generations to come, often they refer to now as the JP2 generation. He saw something in us that was a light or a spark of interest that would lead towards better times. And so I think in terms of how did people respond to that, it seems that for the most part people responded great graciously and really felt a personal invitation, not just from John Paul II, but even more so and more importantly from Christ. And I think his encouragement of not being afraid and recognizing that God needs us, it was addressed on a personal level, each person that was there and every person that came after. That's what's cool about it is, yes, it was a homily that was shared in 1993, but it wasn't until 2008 that Mike and I came across these words, and it was just as strong, arguably, as it was when it was presented. Given that we weren't there when it was originally presented, and so yeah, I think not only was it effective then, but I think it's still effective now, and more people need to hear it. So yeah, I mean, what Nikki shared earlier is fantastic, but as it was said earlier too, like take the time to read the whole speech because it's worth the while, worth the time. And I would go further to encourage people to invite the Holy Spirit to be with them as they're reading and reflecting on this homily, on the speech, and so that God can be the part of the conversation that takes place as you unpack these words, and hopefully, I'm certain that there's something that God will speak to your heart written within these words.
Yeah, that's good, Jimmy. Nikki, I want to actually ask you a specific question off of this because, as you know, Biking for Babies has an age limit. You have to be younger than 40 to be able to do the ride, and older than 18 unless you have parents sign you off on it. So this specific call from St. John Paul II to move the youth is actually true for Biking for Babies. Do you want to touch on why that is for Biking for Babies? Because I think it resonates with what Jimmy just said about this speech.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's transformed over time. We extended it a little bit. I think in the first years it was like 18 to 35 when we had to put a number to it, and now it's 18 to 39. And when we were having that conversation, a lot of it was, okay, who is our target audience here? What is our primary focus? And as we learned how to name it, we really want to mobilize this generation of young adults who get to first encounter the gospel of life and experience and understand and see their own lives as inherently worthy simply because they're children of God. So yes, we talk a lot about how these young people, go and ride or support crew and bring about, transformation for these women and their children. and then the people that they encounter by sharing the gospel. But it first has to start with each one of us. And the reason for the age range, in part, is because it's the age range that is where abortion happens the most. Where, as I kind of highlighted, like the culture of death is targeting the most as people in this age group come to age. And the question, as you posed it before, Kevin, highlights, like, or I think more specifically, the wordage in our outline talks about how human dignity is just so challenged, and the earlier parts of his address talk about that and talk about um, not only human dignity being challenged, but like the family being under attack. And as young people, like, we're directly moving into those stages of life, making very important decisions about what God is calling us to, or maybe, in absence of an understanding of what God is calling us to, just decisions about our human dignity and what are we going to do with that?
Well, and I think too, like you go to daily mass and you see a young person there, and it's it's attractive to see somebody that's young at mass and making faith a priority and taking the time to be there. And it's not uncommon in that scenario to see people from older generations approach a young person and either thank them for coming, for showing up, or encouraging them just by their simple presence. And I think JP2 saw that and was ever more encouraged through his experience going to Denver and seeing so many people respond just simply to be there and to be a part of the World Youth Day that took place in '93.
Yeah. Mike, do you have something to build off of that? Otherwise, I have a specific question along these lines for you.
Uh, no, I don't necessarily have anything to add. No.
So I want to ask you, Mike, because I think last episode you talked about you help with, I call it CCD. I apologize. I know that's not what it's called in your diocese. But you mentioned that that's very life-giving for you, that you really enjoy working with those youth. And so I guess maybe more broadly, we talked about Biking for Babies, but even more to the kids that you work with, do you see the spark? I guess when you think about JP2 addressing in '93 the youth then, do you think the youth are just as energized now, or what's your sense on that?
Well, I mean, I think that the environment or the audience that I have is a little bit different than the youth maybe associated with say a World Youth Day or Biking for Babies, right? Because everyone is there voluntarily.
Mm.
PSR is some kind of moral or some kind of obligation right? um which I mean affords its own, like, I enjoy that particular challenge, experience. I mean, I think that the challenge, like, for me that I do enjoy is trying to get the kids who are, dropped off there to a point, where their souls and hearts are get stirred a little bit by wonder and those seeds of the dedicated Christian life, if you will, right? And um, I did show them one, the more well produced video from Biking for Babies at the end of the year. Whether it's integrating something by John Paul II or Father Mike Schmitz, right? These, you could say these various prophets of the new evangelization, right? Trying to get those voices at the right moment, the right time, and but at the same time, just leaving things to God's hands. Like I'd say that there were 3 students. We had 12 students. I'd say there were 3. I felt like something set right really well, whether it's something their parents said to me after the year was over, or just sort of a subtle non-word, exchange at the end of the year. Um, which, yeah, I mean, that's enough to sort of be grateful for. And I guess another way to answer that question, right, is that yeah, I think that that youthful appetite is still there for those things that John Paul talks about and those other prophets, which is gratifying and encouraging because it can maybe not feel that way, in the world we live in that's saturated by digital nonsense and dark nonsense and just nonsense.
Every level of nonsense gets hit. You know, and again, we can always go to a different question, just trying to feed off of that last point, Mike, because I think it's interesting. Jimmy had brought this up about not being afraid. Um, I don't know. We talked a lot about AI last time. We're not going to go down that same rabbit hole, but I think it bears noting that technology there's kind of this dark side. I think as a parent personally, I'm afraid of social media. I'm afraid. I watch my kids on their phone, not my personal kids, my college students, excuse me, on their phone all the time. Really funny story. Walked him do the first day of class of my undergraduate class. About 20 some students, so I was a little early. They were there a little early to set up, and the room is pitch black. I mean, not totally pitch black, but it's dark. They're all sitting
Oh my
in
god.
chairs very far from each other, just staring at their phones. So the only light I can really see is coming out their face. And I walk in, I just look at them all. I was like, "Are you guys just sitting here in the dark?" And truly, no one had a response. They just kind of looked up at me. I was like, "Oh, this must be the teacher." You know what I mean? Because they didn't know who I was. But it is. It like to me, that is scary to some sense. And so this whole not being afraid to like preach from the rooftops in some ways my personal feeling, and we can maybe riff off of this, my personal feeling is my fear is not so much of total hatred of what I have to say. It's actually the fact that people have no care for what I'm about to
Mhm.
say. It's almost the apathy, which
Yeah.
again, Mike, I feel like you felt and alluded to. So yeah, I guess what fears do you think John Paul II was speaking to here in 1993? And then what fears do we have today when it comes to evangelizing, talking about the pro life movement in a productive way and things like that?
I think he hits on one of them in an earlier statement from this, where he's talking about moral relativism. And so I think part of the fear is people being afraid to speak the truth with love. And um, and so yeah, I mean it's living at a time of moral relativism where everybody kind of decides their own outcomes and you do you and all that, and everybody wants to make sure to keep on in good rapport and everybody's walking on eggshells, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that that's where the fear comes into play, particularly when it comes to life and death matters. And I think the unfortunate reality is that people aren't treating life and death matters as reality. And the fear is that we're putting more of a fear of the unknown and perceptions of others over the reality of um, the lives that are at stake, and not saying or doing anything. And something that I was shared with me when I think I might have been in college at the time, but it's something I share with young people still yet to this day is that if I'm sitting in a room and there's a can or uh, a cup that's in the room and it's labeled on the cup or on the can says poison, and I just let it sit there, and I take the route of saying, oh well, I don't want to impose it on anybody. I'm just going to let that can sit there and let people, kind of make decisions for themselves. Like if I were to say that, that would be that would be insane. That would be stupid. And my boys don't like when I say stupid. I tell them not to. It's a bad word in our house. Sorry. Um, but that would be ridiculous. You wouldn't just kind of sit back when there's a can of poison that's in the middle of the room. You would say something. And I think similarly, there's plenty of poison that's out there in our culture today, and we need to be willing to respond to that. And that's the courage of which is required, and the fear that John Paul, I think, was addressing at that time. But I think that fear is still very much present today.
Yeah, I think that fear. I'll share a personal story. I think that fear is super present. So the university I'm at right now, I am the faculty supervisor for the pro-life club on campus, which they hadn't had a faculty supervisor, I think, for 7 years until I agreed to take it. But it was not like an easy agree, which is I guess there's some shame of even admitting that for all the work I've done with playing for babies, but that goes on your CV. That's like everyone in the department's going to know, the university is going to know that it's you who heads this group. And I think part of the fear too is like, you're letting students run it. And so you don't really know what you're getting into and what they're going to say and bring on campus. But the students I've worked with through that have been just such a joy and truly love life and have a great, I think, a very Biking for Babies-esque feel to them. Really leave you with a servant's heart. But I agree, Jimmy. I think that fear of being canceled, like there's no way you can get promoted now unless you drop that off your CV. And I want to be very fair to the university. I think that's an inflated fear, if I'm being honest, because several of my colleagues know and they, oh, okay, that's you're doing what you believe in, and that's fine. So I guess I also want to just stress, if people do feel that fear, I sit in a pretty secular secular job setting, and I've really not had people really get too upset with me about doing something like that, which is good. But I think that fear is a little inflated. I think that's where I think a lot of spiritual warfare happens in that, because I think people are more willing to at least hear your side in a conversation, as long as you're not yelling at them, than not. So
Well, and I think it's important to point out, like, fear is not from God, and also to remember too, what's written in Scripture that God reminds us is that perfect, and I think it's in John's Gospel maybe, but perfect love casts out all fear, or maybe it's in John's letter, but yeah, perfect love casts out all fear. And so at any time where we find ourselves timid or afraid, like we need to lean more into our faith and trust more in God. And easier said than done. And I don't speak with a perfect record by any stretch of the equation. But it is something that I have to be reminded of on the daily, and try to encourage others in that same pursuit. And I think that it's easy to kind of fall into complacency and routine, and I think that's something that John Paul somewhat addresses here too, as well as is calling people out of complacency, and
yeah,
calling people to, yeah, a higher, uh, recognizing their calling, and encouraging them to an even higher calling, to go beyond just the bare bones minimum. I mean, think of my own faith journey and experience, and definitely went through a phase where it was more routine than anything else. And I went to Sunday mass out of fulfillment of obligation and or out of respect for my parents. But how many people are just kind of going through the motions and establishing a routine and just doing it because, without really a fundamental understanding of why, and the more like the heart of the matter, and as far as the relationship that's involved there. And I think it begs the question, like, is the relationship that you have with Christ one that you have a deep and fond love and affection for, or is it one in which you just kind of, he's there and you're here, and you kind of like do your own thing? And yeah, I don't know. I think that as I was reflecting on this, just in preparation for this, that's something that really stood out, is just the relational aspect of where are you? That's a question for each of us, myself included. Like, where are you in your relationship with God, and have you invited Him completely into your life? And one question have been kind of chewing on the last year or two, also has to do with the question of love. Like, do I love conditionally or unconditionally? And if my deepest heart's desire is to love unconditionally, that means there's no conditions. And so if I'm called to love unconditionally, because ultimately as Christians we are all called to love unconditionally, because as Christians we're called to follow Christ, and Christ went completely through to the end and held nothing back, then that is going to require for me to step into situations where I'm timid and afraid. And that's what Jesus reminded his disciples and lead up before his crucifixion. And he knew that full well, that what was going to happen, as far as all of them, with the exception of John, were going to abandon him. Peter was going to deny him, and Judas was going to betray him. And I think that that's important for us in those moments where we find ourselves timid and are afraid. And even further in those moments where we give into fear, not to throw in the towel. Like we all make mistakes, just like Peter did, just like each one of us do. And when we mess up, like the best thing that we can do is go back to God, lean into Him, and ask for forgiveness, but also ask for help. And I think that that's something that's really beautiful about the experience of going on the mission, being a part of the Biking for Babies ride. Is there's plenty of breakdown moments that everybody experiences in some way or another. And if they don't experience it directly, they see it through the experience that somebody else on their team on the ride has. And those are step up moments, whether you're the one experiencing those challenging set of circumstances or you're witnessing someone else on your team experiencing that. And the question then becomes, how do you respond?
Mhm.
And whether it's you that's experiencing it or someone else on your team, how do you respond? And taking that experience limited to the week long ride and then applying that for the rest of your life. Whether you're the one again experiencing the difficult trials and challenges, or you see somebody else who's experiencing some hard times. Like if somebody's experiencing the analogous flat tires several times throughout the day, like what are you going to do to lift them up? And we got to be more willing to jump off the saddle and be ready to help in inflating the tires.
No, Jimmy, that's well said. And I think just personally, you've always been such a spiritual leader to me, just listening to you talk, a lot of hours on the bike and just a lot of good things to say. And I think that's something that you and Mike and actually Nikki do very well, which is to persevere when it is tough and to not be afraid. Just to share a quick story about Jimmy, when he and I were doing the Dallas to Chicago route. I don't know if you remember, Jimmy, when we were coming into Chicago, that woman ran us off the road and you start biking after her, which is hilarious because I know you're fast, man, but you ain't gonna catch her. Um, and what I found, so I was very afraid. I remember we kind of ditched it. We kind of ditched it in the ditch. You stayed on your bike, somehow it kept going. My heart was racing. I was like, oh my gosh,
Mm,
do I even get back on the road? And Jimmy's chasing after him. By the time you got back and I saw you're frustrated in your face and you just looked at me, you're like, Kevin, I just want to talk to her. You just want to tell her what
mm,
we're actually doing so she knows. And I was so moved by that because it was a lack of fear. I was afraid. I mean, maybe you'd say you were afraid, but to me, it felt like someone who genuinely wanted to talk, maybe get a little frustrated with her, but like also genuinely like wanted her to hear the mission.
mhm.
And I think through the years I've ridden with you and Mike, both of you have done that so well. Mike, I don't know if I've ever smelled fear on you. I don't know if it I just wanna be very honest, and Jimmy, I would say the same for you, but, one of the things that really stood out, definitely the first 3 years and beyond, Mike, is just your relentless pursuit to really make yourself better within the mission, particularly as a writer, because that's what we were mostly doing, but and I guess if you don't mind me asking this, off the beaten path question, but where does that come from you? And then I'm gonna ask Nikki the same thing because I'll kind of explain why I think she will have a good answer to this too. But Mike, where does that come from? Because I think was it a few years ago you did a 300-mile ride? Is that right?
Yeah, 2021. Yep.
So where does that desire to just really push yourself to get to the next
Um,
level come
yeah, it's funny you asked that because it sort of relays that urgency point and related to actually an episode the speech guys did from the Speeches by Dad series. I think I put the fine point on this idea. The speech excerpt I called Lucy by Father Mike Schmitz that he gave at the 2019 Sikh conference. And I think this is where I brought that up. But I guess just to answer it more on point without going into the details of that speech episode. Um, yeah, that's a fun question. Sort of inherently flattering. So thank you that it seems that I'm relentless. I really don't feel that way. But I mean, I think growing up as the youngest has a big effect on that. Um, when you're the youngest, like by default, you come out into the world inferior in pretty much every way. I mean, 0 years old, and my brother was 6 and my sister was 8. So they at that point definitely knew way more than I did. And, and that's the case for the first many years of your life. But then eventually at some point, right, it starts to become not always true, right? Because you begin to experience different things they do and have a different state of reason and all those different things. But I think the most obvious things that can sort of be a less what's what I'm looking for? A more maybe appropriate metaphor for other things is like that physical life with running. I've said many times, and it's interesting, like, yeah, bike frames wouldn't exist from this end if Lauren and Dan hadn't run cross country, right? I mean, those are endurance sports. And Dan picked up bicycling from his friend Lath, and he did these 40-mile road rides on the road. And I thought, whoa, that sounds so crazy far. I'd love to do that one day, right? And like I was very easily impressed by them growing up, right? I'd see them in my sister won many cross country races, and I thought that's so cool, right? There's just a natural state of admiration, right? And running is obviously not the most important thing in the world, but by becoming a good runner, it does develop certain natural virtue and exposes you to certain kinds of people, right? This is actually an interesting side point too. Is I've remarked this several times. All of the top guys I know from like my year of running in Southern Illinois are all conservative Christians, like even through today. Whereas my brother's generation, God bless their soul, they had more of like that hedonistic style. And I'm not trying to say that in like a deprecating way, that's just what it was. The culture around running back then was more just drinking a lot and partying when you weren't running. Whereas, yeah, it was different by the time I came around. And one can speculate why that is, but yeah, so I think those are some of the early formational experiences growing up that that sort of shaped that relentlessness. And I think anything else to that, I guess maybe to comment a little bit on that 300-mile bicycle ride. I did that right after I was done teaching at Chabot, where I taught religion and agriculture for 2 years. And it was specifically the fundraiser for that ride was for Chabot Scholarship Fund. So Chabot is, near here. So it's southeast of St. Louis. And what Chabot does really well is it does provide a lot of scholarships for kids from poor communities like Cahokia or East St. Louis to get a Catholic education at Chabot. And so, I wanted to contribute to that and fundraise some money for that scholarship fund there. I don't know. So that's where the relentlessness comes from. If I put one more fine point on it, but then it's like, I go to U of I and obviously met Jimmy and met other friends who were either also relentless in the endurance life, and that sort of illuminated their vision of the Christian life, which I thought, well, that's crazy cool. I'd sort of been exposed to that of my cross country scene to some extent. And then met people who are relentless, like in other ways, but still also sort of found a way to illuminate the Christian life through that. And yeah, so I think, getting into then that Catholic community sort of lit an even more natural or supernatural, I guess you could say, fire to all of that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Because it was something that stood out to me. Like I had said, it stood out just how relentless you and Jimmy were those first couple of years and all the years I rode with you, really. And I'm going to give a little bit of a insider look at the executive director's life, Nikki, because and this is going to be flattering. She's my wife. I'm not trying to score any points here. We have 6 kids. We're fine in that category. But I'll probably get edited out. Sorry, it's 9:50. So, but and just from behind the scenes, this is an individual who, a mom, a working mom from home, has to deal with a new child right now and is somehow crushes at work. And I guess so, Nikki, where does your relentlessness come from? Because I would argue that every day you go to work and are with our kids at home at the same time, it's a relentless feat to have to do.
Thanks, sweetie. Um, so I'm a convert, and I think, Mike talked a little bit about his childhood. For me, growing up, I'm ever the optimist, and I grew up in a very secular family, very loving, awesome family, but a family that didn't see the world with my very, optimistic outlook. And I just always was different. And finding the faith and finding people who had authentic joy was just so captivating for me. So to just find this place that feels like home, um, and feel like God is calling me to kind of continual renewal and that encouragement. And again, everything is possible for he who has faith. I just feel like God has totally um, I have a simple faith, honestly, is what I feel like God just I don't question as much as some of you very entrepreneurial, very like 30,000 foot view folks do. I just feel like one of my key phrases is do the next right thing. And I feel like God puts that so clearly for me. I'm not perfect. This is making it sound like I'm super perfect, but um so I think that's definitely a lot of it, but I know that, when we talk to our missionaries, I'm the most inspired when I get to look at them in the eyes and speak just the truth to them that God made them and that their life is a gift, and I believe that with my whole being, and I think to know that about my own self and to know that God has put me here in this role and both as, a mother, a wife, and then also in this mission as executive director, um it's all a gift, and I don't know exactly what answer you're looking for, Kev, but, um, I just wake up and do the next right thing, honestly.
Sounds like being relentless just comes natural to you.
I'm not as medaled or as decorated as you guys, in terms of the mileage, but looks a little different.
Sorry, I had to switch the mics on like I said I was dying. So I apologize. That'll be kind of a weird transition. But no, that actually was exactly what I was looking for. If you weren't going to say do the next best thing, I was going to because I think it's something the three of you that I've encountered. What you might not, Jimmy and Mike may not have used those exact terms, but I'm waiting for babies. I mean, Mike, you had told the hilarious story of getting the boot. Like that morning was a train wreck,
Mm,
an absolute train wreck. And Mike, I don't know how you did it. It's hey, we just do the next thing we have to do to get on the road. Were you frustrated?
mm,
Yeah, sure. Like you're human, but it was the next best thing that needed to happen. So that's why I ended with you because I feel like it's something that Jimmy, Mike, and Nikki, obviously, I've seen you guys do through this mission. And I think it gets exemplified in this mission. So much so. I think the only Mike, if you don't mind me telling one story, the one time I can remember you having a quote unquote bad day on the bike. I think
ooh.
it was our last year. You remember we were heading from Chicago south and we had that super nasty headwind first day.
Yeah.
And you and I ended up switching lead. I think most of the time, I think Sarah Vogt at the time, Nowakowski took the lead a little bit here and there, but she was a smaller body, so it didn't really help. And it was the next day that actually you were the most sore. It was really the first time I think I remember you saying anything about soreness. And you and I were kind of hanging out in the back. We didn't have a headwind, thankfully, and we were going up a hill, and you were just like, Kevin, do you ever think why the heck are we out here? I don't know if you remember that, but I
I
remember
don't
it
remember
because
that, but
you don't I we were going up a hill, and I remember you saying it, and then you just laughed, and then you just went up the hill. There it's like that's all you had to tell yourself was, "This is crazy, but here we are, we're gonna stick with it." And that was the last you said of it, which is probably why I don't remember it. Probably wasn't that memorable to you,
yeah.
but I'm sitting here, I was hurting, I didn't say anything, I was watching you go up the hill, I was like, "Dang it, where did that energy come from? Why did you just start doing that?" So yeah, it's fun to look at how the mission has kind of I guess to bring it back to this speech that fearlessness. I think there's a lot of fearlessness in this mission, and I could tell a lot of stories about great missionaries, but we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. So I guess just to get back to the speech, again, you can always skip to a different question, but something that feels kind of follows what we were just saying is this idea of, was this a rally cry? Was it a homily? Was it a rally cry? Was it a political address? And are there elements of each, and how do they interact? So I think that kind of is the next question that leads from what we were just talking about, unless someone has a different idea.
Well, just some thoughts to keep in mind here. I'm definitely good for like one more discussion question and then the final bell.
We could also find a bell right now too. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
I'm also fine with the final bell too.
My computer just told me it went into battery saving mode.
Don't you have a
Son of a gun.
source of power?
I do, but of course I left it upstairs. I didn't think it would die this quickly.
Okay.
So.
I can bring it to you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing strikes me about H. I mean, maybe Jimmy's got some thoughts there, but
it was just highlighted, so I thought you had highlighted it.
Yeah, that's true. I did highlight it as if saying I have thoughts.
So, the question is just: is this a spiritual homily, a moral rallying cry, or a political address, or does it have different elements of it? Which, yeah, I'm not overly struck by it, Mike. It just felt like it was I didn't really see another natural transition into any of the other questions, which maybe means it's a really good time to do the final bell.
By the way, Mike, I'm building off of you tonight. So we get to this point when you're asking, I defer to Mike and Nikki.
Is that the final bell question? What shouldn't missionaries be afraid of?
I mean, it's possible. I think it's an okay question if we don't come up with something else.
Yeah, I like it. It segues nicely into what we were just talking about. Way better than what I was thinking. So,
yeah. Well, as we say at speech, guys, final bell.
Ding, 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 ding,
ding.
That was so weird.
And then Ross would say, "All your strength, all your power, all your love."
What round is it? It's 15. One more round. There's no stopping this now. This is our round. Don't stop it now. We started, we don't stop. All your strength, all your power, all your love, everything you've got. This is your whole life. Do it now.
Okay, we're back. Final bell here with John Paul II's 1993 World Youth Day speech in Denver. Talked about fear, not being afraid. Think about the different ways fear can manifest in the modern Christian life. But maybe we'll think specifically, too, how they might manifest in that national ride, which, exactly 1 month? No, it's less than a month away, well under a month away. The alumni ride is 1 month away. Let's see. Let's count out the weeks. 1, 2, 3. 3.5 weeks. What things should missionaries not be afraid of during the national ride? This can be specific, practical, or broader, abstract, spiritual manifestations.
Well, I'll take the lead because Jimmy's going to go the spiritual route, I assume, and give him some time to think. Practically speaking, don't be afraid about the miles. I know we talked about that, but don't let the distance scare you. I think that's honestly where the devil probably plays the most. Definitely did for my first couple of years. Don't be afraid about the miles, because you are able to do it. If you put the time and training in and you have a good team, you are able to do it. I was able to do it very early on with very little biking experience. And so I truly believe that everybody who really puts their heart and soul into the training and really lets their heart be a part of the mission, God's going to do the rest. And so if you're a new missionary listening to this and you're really nervous about the training, I would say just trust what you're doing, trust your team and trust God, and really let that kind of conquer all your fears in that area.
Hey, we'll let Nikki have the final word here as the executive director. So it means I'll go. So then Jimmy can find something in what I say to run off. So he's not doing this. Folks, I was reenacting the 2013 EWTN Life on the Rock episode where he hid his face from the national audience. It was not exactly like yours. It's just similar. Yeah, don't be afraid of how tired you are. It can be, and that goes whether you're a support crew or the rider, just fatigue in different ways. Cause yeah, I remember the one year I was support crew when we were in Sykeston, and going to Freeburg the next day. I remember being at the gas station at midnight, filling water coolers with ice or something, and obviously being tired from the whole week of lack of sleep and thinking I would had to get up in 4.5 or so hours, but still just being really excited and having a great time. And, you know, and then on the other side of it, from the riding side, it's like, man, just your legs can get so insanely sore, like more sore than you think that they could ever get. And that can be really intimidating to a first time rider, of course. But, through a little bit of grace, through the mysteries of our physiology, we just have a dramatic capacity to go far further than we tend to think. Yeah. So, but the thing is, like you can't get as far as you need to go if you do sort of wallow in a sense in your own discomfort. You really just have to take each moment 1 mile at a time or 1 hour at a time and just enjoy those graces, whether it's in the new friendships or old friendships that end up sustaining you from one state to another.
If you expect the unexpected, then you'll be okay. And um, one kind of mentality that we've kind of as the biking for baby spirit is somewhat adapted to from what's been experienced on focused mission trips, and that is the okay good attitude, that in whatever the given situation may be okay good. And I think with that you smile and then see where the next pedal stroke takes you. And yeah, like Mike was saying, you don't want to create a pity party where you're just kind of wallowing in your own misery. And a lot of what you experience on the ride, similar to life, is it's a mental game. And so I think that it's important that when you recognize that you're in your head too much, then get out of your head and allow grace in those moments. Something that I wanted to also say too, just kind of building off of the question, and it's more of a clarifying point from earlier. Earlier, I said that fear is not from God, and I want to clarify on that because there's a distinction that needs to be made as far as that fear goes, and that's that paralyzing terror fear that is not from God. There is also fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom, as scripture reminds us. And so like that's important too, because that beginning of wisdom creates that awe that leads to the awesomeness, which is the reality of who God is and who we are in relation to him. So fear without God is not from God, but fear with God leads us to love. And so I just wanted to make that distinction because I think that it's important. And it is important also to recognize too, like there's going to be moments maybe during the ride, and if not during the ride, at least in your life for sure, where things again will not go the way that was maybe what you had expected, or uncertainty sets in. And certainty can sometimes breed fear. And I think that most important thing to do in those moments is to lean on God, to lean into grace, and to recognize the support that you have through the many other people who are around you. And so I think that that's really what's important is to not give into fear that is not from God.
So, a lot of what your responses were about the individual missionaries and what they experience and what they should not fear. And Jimmy took mine a little bit, but I'm going to take it a little bit farther. So, expect the unexpected. Absolutely. Something is going to go wrong. Everything is going to go wrong. And it's really hard when missionaries have really terrible national ride weeks. Some sometimes it's just like, that's not the week that we wanted for you. You know, we want this completely transformative week that, yes, you worked incredibly hard. You got to that moment where God just, you felt like, as Kevin has described, you felt him just pedal for you. Maybe you only made it a couple miles farther, but you felt it, right? You gave it that leap of faith, and he blessed it. And then, it was still hard, but you made it. Some people just have ridiculous things that happen on the ride, and you your response to that matters. But what I would want our missionaries to not be afraid of is not only your response to the suffering that you have. um, that matters because He's gonna bless that. He's gonna redeem that in some way for your faith, for those around you, for the mamas and the babies, and for the cultural renewal at large. But as much as we want you to respond appropriately, we also want to be aware of moments where you can allow others to be vulnerable and for you to accompany them in their suffering. A lot of our pregnancy centers talk about how they can support these women in their crisis, difficult, unplanned, at risk pregnancy, but they can't take away everything. They can't take away her suffering. And we know that God is with her in her suffering and he will give her the grace. And these pregnancy centers will do everything they absolutely can to make it easier to support her in her yes, not only in that pregnancy but beyond. So, how can we reflect on that at the national ride level as missionaries? It's riding 600 miles in no way equates to a woman in that situation, considering abortion or otherwise. But how can you be that pregnancy center for your fellow missionaries? We'll call it that. How can you accompany them and encourage them to be vulnerable, to accept help, and really to be okay, not taking away everything, not taking away all of their pain and all of their suffering, because suffering is not inherently bad. God is working on their hearts in some way, and that's okay. So you be with them and walk with them in that suffering, and God will redeem it.
I want to final really quick. So this is just right after the statement that Nikki read earlier from John Paul's homily, St. John Paul the Great's homily. So it is you who must go out into the byroads and invite everyone you meet to the banquet which God has prepared for his people. The gospel must not be kept hidden because of fear or indifference. It was never meant to be hidden away in private. It has to be put on a stand so that people may see its light and give praise to our Heavenly Father. So hopefully that those words from the same speech may be a source of encouragement for each and for all of you. And something that I shared earlier today, just with somebody that I was reading this with, if we know that in our faith that God can create something out of nothing, and He's created everything, and everything that He's created is good. So if we give him a little, that's more than what he needs in order to do amazing things, because he can create something out of nothing. So the more we give, there's opportunity for God to bless that in infinitely abundant ways. And so that holds true too with our fear, and that's something that we can give to God.
Nice. Beautifully said, as always, Jimmy. Well, with that, Mike, I think you can wrap us up with the tagline here.
That's right. And this is, well, before the tagline, even, this is closing up the 3-episode Biking for Babies series, sponsored by the Speech Guides. Maybe it can be an annual thing. 3 episodes. This year is free, but next time. Ross Johnson did ask for some merch, some Biking for Babies merch. So keep that in mind there. But until then, as we say at Speech Guides headquarters, thanks for drinking
and thinking
with us.
Very good. And Nikki,
I got it. Yeah.
Nikki, what do you say?
Cue the music?
No, not yet.
Someone tell me what to say.
Be safe.
Be safe out there. Okay.
Cue the music. We'll see you in St. Louis in a month.
Man.
That was good. Excellent. Nice job.
Look toward the horizon. Up ahead you'll find a peace of mind, relief from the trying. I have burned a bridge, wrecked in a ditch, had to ask forgiveness. Dead ends come and go, look toward the horizon. Oh, there are stories to tell, the times we grew and the times we fell.